All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Fourth Awakening. We're here to talk about the third episode of the first season of Black Mirror, the entire history of you. So, this is a really, really good episode. Probably one of my favorites. Definitely a great one to share with a friend if you're just trying to show a little taste of what Black Mirror is. So, Scott, you want to kick us off, give us the background of what happens in this episode?
Yeah, sure thing. So one thing that's interesting about this episode compared to some other Black Mirrors, not only for like this season but also like future seasons, is that we're almost kind of like thrown like right into sort of kind of like what's going on. So we meet the main character whose name is Liam, and he actually works at this law firm. And what's happening is he's basically getting like interviewed for like a position or whatever. But then as the story goes on, we actually see that he's able to sort of go back over the interview view via it's almost kind of like contact lenses that are video cameras essentially. And we're introduced to this little piece of technology called a grain. It's almost like an embedded piece of tech that goes like in like a temple or whatever. But basically it allows people to sort of scroll through or like review. I think the term that they use is redo, and basically kind of go back through like different like recordings that they've uh, pretty much have lived through. But also they use it through multiple other different ways, such as like security for like TSA and stuff like that. But specifically in this episode, we really are sort of kind of jumped into sort of kind of how it's used in this specific character's perspective.
Yeah,
But
and
it's
one of the really
pretty trippy.
interesting yeah, and one of the really interesting things that we see right from the get-go of this show is that it's used not just for issues of security, that's clearly why it was invented, how it started, but then it's also
Hmm.
used for entertainment, right? Like we
Oh
come to the
yeah.
dinner party at the beginning and they're just showing things up on the screen, they're just, having a good time laughing at these various memories.
Yeah, yeah. This guy's like complaining about like his frayed rug or whatever, and he like you can
Right.
basically almost kind of like airdrop it like onto like a TV or something like that.
Yeah.
And but I think particularly what we see in this episode too, though, is how it can be sort of kind of misconstrued in a way. There's multiple times throughout it where like people literally use like someone else's words like against them and like are able to rewind to like a specific phrase that they say and like keep repeating it over and over again, and other things along those lines
Right,
too.
yeah. So, and one of the sort of interesting things then that starts up from the beginning is this idea of a trial and having evidence in order to get people, right? Because if everything
Mm.
is being recorded from every single person, you can know what really, really happened. And so that's really played out through the drama of a relationship in this show where Liam, and I think her name is Fee or Phi, or is it Fio?
Theon, I believe, but pretty much like the
Yeah, but
husband
he but
seems
he
to
call
call her
Liam
Fee
calls
though.
her Fee, so we're gonna
Yeah,
go with
yeah.
Fee. So, um, basically it's played out through this relationship drama between kind of Liam, Fee, and then this other man named Jonas. And Liam and Fee are married together.
Hmm.
And after the beginning, Liam finishes a job interview and then goes to this dinner party where he more or less sees his wife kind of flirting with this guy Jonas. It's kind of ambiguous at first, but then as it gets replayed, he keeps sort of realizing or thinking, convincing himself that she was flirting with him.
Hmm. And that's really where we started to kind of start to see the down spiral. It's like first he's a little bit suspect, and then he kind of like accuses her, but then he apologizes. But then he pretty much it's implied that he pretty much spends the entire rest of that night into the morning, like digging back through the previous dinner party to try and see like different examples. And so like even when his wife wakes up the next morning, he's zooming in on different things. Actually, even before his wife wakes up, he grabs the babysitter, which crashed at their place last night, and asked if one of his jokes was funny that his wife laughed at, which clearly
Right, right.
wasn't at all.
It was clearly he was being overly jealous, but the weird sort of
Hmm.
crazy twist of this show is that he's kind of right. Like, in a sense, through zooming in and refinding things and then going in and threatening Jonas with a bottle that he's going to cut him to delete the pictures, he sees a tiny little image on his screen which proves and which, Fee later confirms that she had slept with him about 18 months ago when they had an argument together. Liam and Fee had an argument.
Hmm.
And so Fee went and slept with Jonas. And possibly, and this is where the sort of bombshell drops, it's very likely that the child that they have together, that Fee has been saying is his child, Liam's child, is actually Jonas's child. So so it's a really mind-twisting episode, a really mind-twisting show, because I mean there's that twist in there where obviously Liam, right, like Scott, I mean you felt this too, like obviously he's completely overreacting, obviously he's being overly jealous, but at the same time it's also hard to justify the claim that Fee was right to be lying to him, that lying to him when she likely knew that he was raising a child that wasn't his own. Like it's also hard to justify that.
Yeah, it's trippy because it seems like at first, from just like the audience perspective, that it seems like he's almost like grasping at straws or like trying to like prove something that's not even there or whatever. But the more he digs, the more he finds out that like this piece of technology that's embedded within him can actually be used as a tool to like discover like the truth, whether that's deep and dark, which in this case it kind of is for him, of which he discovers.
But and the thing that's like hard to figure out is whether or not, because Fee the whole time, right, like he's obviously being very aggressive to her towards the end there, but she's crying and she's saying that, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you,
Mm-hmm.
and then
and basically
so she
during
doesn't
that
want to
scene
show
too. Yeah, and basically during that scene too, he's actually, it's sort of almost kind of like the culmination of like he's trying to like definitely prove like whether or not like the child is actually his, and so he wants her to like post up on like the public, like the television in the room or whatever, like a redo of 18 months ago around the time of when she would have slept with Jonas, to see if he wore a condom or not. Like he wants her to put that up on the screen to see if like they actually used a condom when they had slept together, to see
because they had been trying to have a kid, but they weren't successful.
Yeah, they've been trying.
But then it was shortly after then that they did have a kid, and so right, and so it's very strongly implied in the show that the baby isn't his, and so it I mean it really really twists with you, it really really messes with you, and the question really becomes like you start like it's really hard. Like you can't just land a straight judgment, because he's 100% wrong for how he was acting, the anger which he showed, the jealousy which he was showing, the just small-mindedness that he was expressing. But technically he was right. Like you know what I mean? And so I think that there's an interesting sort of idea here, which is how different sorts and different kinds of evidence stand for different sorts of things. Here's what I mean by that. Like it seems like they were trying to, he's trying to find a prosecutorial kind of level of evidence, like, oh, well, I need video proof, and that he's trying to pursue video, evidence or whatever for this sort of thing. But perhaps that kind of reasoning, perhaps that kind of argument isn't fitting for a relationship, because at the end we see him completely regretting it. He almost as if, right, like he has to take it out himself. He has to free himself from his own memories, and he's completely regretting the end of his relationship, almost as if it didn't matter that he was right, in a sense. Am I on to something, or is that just...
Well, just to clarify, the taking out too, he actually does pretty much do that by force. Like he's essentially like, I think,
right, he takes
gouging out the grain piece of technology. So he's like literally taking a razor to his temple,
because he can't stand it, right?
And then pliers and ripping it out. And particularly, I think one of the reasons that he's doing this is like he's almost become like addicted to it too. He's like he's like all he's doing in the present is just reliving the past.
Well, right, and he's clearly blaming the destruction of his relationship on that grain, or I mean, on himself, of course. I think that there is some sense of responsibility that he recognizes at the end there, but he recognizes that he wouldn't have been capable of that kind of deep sort of insecurity that I just need to look back and check and make sure that everything's all right the whole time. He takes it out because he's like, I can't give myself this power to be able to make sure that I'm constantly right all the time, because I destroyed my life doing that.
Yeah, there's even like almost kind of like a new like trend around like going grainless, which means like people who like aren't even like getting like this embedded piece of technology, and pretty much making the assumption that almost everybody has it at this point. It'll almost be like the equivalent of like not having like a smartphone anymore or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that there's actually like a deeper lesson here, which is that as a society, especially when we talk about the Me Too movement and Believe All Women, we're having a debate as a society together, trying to figure out what are the standards of evidence? What are the kinds of criteria in which we need to have when we talk about allegations of sexual assault or allegations of, child abuse, for instance, when you were a little kid? Because
Yeah,
there aren't those kinds of clear cut, strong evidence in the way
yeah,
that you
and
might be able to find for an instance of murder. But the question becomes whether or not that's the kind of thing we want, right? Like, for when it
mm,
comes to the Me Too movement, it generally became accepted that, well, okay, if you have certain people attesting that can vouch for you at the time, that this is that you told them at the time, and that there's various kind of credible things, that sort of counts as sufficient evidence, right? And so it seems like, as a society, in our day and age, we're starting to think that different sorts of evidence should apply for different sorts of cases. Um,
yeah,
and it's
and
possible that
yeah,
is applying to here, right?
yeah. And just to pause you for a quick minute too, even on just like the child abuse point that you possibly mentioned there too, that's actually a scene that they do. Like one of the first things that they do once they do come back from Liam and Fee from the
Right.
dinner party, and like the babysitter pretty much crashes at their place for the night. They actually go back and rewind through like their kids feed, or like redo their kids feed to make sure like the babysitter like didn't like do anything shady or anything like that.
Yeah,
So
or
one
yeah,
could,
and just to make sure that the baby was well treated, et cetera, et
yeah,
cetera. Like,
yeah, not like
that.
slapping it around or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, you can see clear benefits in some sense, right? Like, the child
Mhm.
can, be taken care of. Children can be better taken care of. In instances of rape allegation, I mean, right now, as a country, we're going through Tara Reid and Joe Biden. They're having a bit of, Tara Reid has accused Joe Biden credibly of sexual assault, but of course, we have no way of having any kind of concrete evidence. And so, those sorts of cases, it's like you can sort of see how this kind of thing came about for, like, I guess, security, or allowing people to, properly be prosecuted and properly be able to seek justice. But there's this deep seated kind of negative effect where you're just living your own life over and over and over again, and you're trying to find this oh, I want video evidence, and I need to have, I need to be sure, I need to, suspect my hunches. Oh, my hunch is right. um
Mhm.
when it might not be really appropriate.
Yeah, there's another part too that's interesting during the dinner party where I think one of the ladies at the table, she mentions how she pretty much works in like almost like the embedment process of the actual grain device. And one of the things that she mentions too is how like the human memory is actually like very like malleable, and like this has actually been
It's true, right?
like tested too. Like people have actually lined up different subjects for like just like completely random like suspect things of like people they might have seen like stealing or whatever, and like people like swear like, oh yeah, like that's the guy, like I saw that guy, it was totally him,
Right,
even if
exactly.
like none of them were at the scene of the crime
Right, you can
whatsoever. Like it's
you can
completely malleable.
easily, exactly, you can easily
Yeah.
get somebody to genuinely believe, not like, oh yeah, I guess it's that person, but genuinely believe and genuinely think that that's the person who did something. And you can have incredibly just off base memories, right? Like, our
Hmm.
reasoning isn't like objective like a video camera. And so you can see why there was an impetus to do this sort of thing. But it seems, though, what the show seems to be suggesting is maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's
Hmm.
a good thing, because then we can believe things. We can tell ourselves myths. We can tell ourselves lies, even when we start to get a hunch. Oh, that's my baby. Even when it might not be, and perhaps that's a good thing. At least that's what I'm starting to see. I mean, it's a terrifying possible thought, but maybe we need those lies in our life.
Hmm. Well, another thing too, which I think would you would probably see in a type of society which has like this type of technology implemented in the day to day life, is almost a lot more of kind of like the persona of like fake smiles. Be like, oh hey, how are you? Oh hi, I'm great. Let's go grab a coffee. Oh, you want to come back to my
Yeah,
place
that
for a
fear of
nightcap?
constantly
Oh
being watched, right? Yeah,
yeah.
because yeah, because anyone can just, you know, pull
Hmm.
up a
And
memory of you.
yeah, and not to try and jump too far ahead, but what actually one of my favorite episodes of Black Mirror, I think this is around season 3, but it's called Nosedive. We'll get to that in a little bit, but it almost kind of tries to take this concept to a little bit more of almost having the so almost kind of like a Yelp review for like a social status
Right.
hierarchical
I mean that
society
yeah,
in
that's
a way.
a
So
that one's a quite a ways away. We'll get to that episode, we
yeah,
promise,
yeah,
guys.
but
But
yeah,
that
but
one's a minute from now.
yeah, and also just an there's no small amount of Easter eggs in Black Mirror too, and there's a little bit of sort of cross pollination between different episodes in the future, or just like episodes in general as well. And so we actually do see this technology resurface a couple different times throughout the series as well, just like being able to like scroll back through like pretty much almost like the eye video cameras or whatever the heck through like the
Yeah.
grain and stuff. So
Yeah, so it is something that we do see repeat, and so it's this idea that the technology sticks with us, even though there's this terrible, like, people are leaving it. People, oh well, it's a political opt out. It seems like it did seem like it stuck, at least in this world.
mhm. Yeah, and it's interesting too because you said well, I think we both agreed that it was this episode to specifically rewatch was almost definitely more of kind of like one of the enjoyable ones for us. I mentioned too how like I think this is almost kind of like the at least especially for season one, almost kind of like the sweet spot of Black Mirror. So like for National Anthem, like that could happen like today, honestly, like just like a terroristic threat like uploaded to like social media. And then for the 15 million, I think merits, believe that's the name of that one. Like that one's definitely a bit more far off, a bit more of kind of like a commentary piece and like a little bit more fictional in the world, pretty much powered by like these bicycles and all
Right.
this one I think is right in the middle, and that's really almost kind of like the sweet spot for Black Mirror, where it's like just enough sort of kind of sci-fi technology that's like not really around yet, but it's not so far into the future that this couldn't happen. Like just imagine like if we get to the point, because already right now like we essentially have like like cameras on the back of our phones that are like the size of our eyeballs, and so, like, why
Yeah.
not put
I
those
mean,
into a contact
in
lens
some
and then
sense,
be
of
able to scroll
course.
through?
I mean, in some sense, of course, like it's all fantasy, right? Like science
Yeah,
fiction
yeah.
is in some sense always a fantasy, but it's a fantasy of a peculiar kind. It's using technology to show us how we really are in our lives today. And
Hmm.
I think that there's a truth to that. There's a piece to that where, sometimes you might dive through old text or, old conversations or something like that. And you end up just realizing, oh well, you should just delete it. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. A
yeah,
bit of a comparison too. Like I think I've mentioned this in one or two videos in the past of us talking about this Black Mirror thing. But one of the best ways I try to describe the series to someone who doesn't know it is pretty much like Black Mirror is like the Twilight Zone, but for like the digital age. And I think there actually is sort of an older Twilight Zone episode that I watched a bit ago. I haven't seen like the entire series at all because there's so many episodes, but there is specifically one though where it's almost kind of like this man who comes across like a slot machine in like a casino or like a restaurant or something, and like he like pulls it a couple times and like doesn't think he's going to be into it, but then he gets like hooked and like it's all
hmm,
he can do, and he like pretty much like just like is wasting his life away to try and like win it big or something like that. And I think that's almost a comparison that we see here in a way too. It's almost like this guy is like constantly scrolling back for the truth to try and like find it, or like to see like if his suspicions are true.
right. But he
But what's
knows
in
he. I mean, he knows in some sense he doesn't want to see, but he has to
Yeah,
see. Like he
yeah,
knows he doesn't want
but
to know, but
yeah,
he
but
knows
that's
he
all.
has to
Yeah,
know.
but
Right.
that's like the crux of it. In a sense, it's kind of it's crazy because like the moment he's right is the moment like his relationship with his wife is pretty much destroyed, because he finds out that his child isn't even his anymore, and so it's a very interesting journey for him to take in that sense, it seems.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a terrifying episode. I mean,
Oh
I
yeah.
could feel myself. It wasn't cringing. Cringing's the wrong word, but just kind of
No, yeah.
I felt
Just
my
like
whole
just like
stomach
like
like
like a tension, like
yeah, it
you
was a
felt like
deep
there's even
tension.
the part where he like literally like screams in his wife's face. He's like, "Show me the clip," or like,
Yeah,
and she's
and
like,
he's clearly a monster at that point.
"Oh yeah,
It's he
yeah,
has transformed into someone that no doubt he never wanted to be. No doubt that she ever really saw him as, but he transformed into this terrible person. So in some sense, you don't feel bad for him for losing the relationship because in some sense he deserved it. But in another sense, it's also you kind of do feel bad for him because he's like he was kind of right, like
yeah."
his
I
suspicions
think
were right. But the other thing though is even he at the end kind of had the agreement that, well, it didn't matter that he was right. That doesn't really matter.
I think you made an interesting observation too about how even during the beginning of the episode almost kind of seems to cascade into the rest of it about how he seems like very like
Yeah.
because what does he start to like redo over again? He keeps rewatching like the meeting they just got
Right.
out of, and
Yeah.
like
I mean,
trying to re-examine it and see if he got it right, or like like in the cab on with his wife back home to the dinner party, she's helping him look through the
and
footage
she
too,
thinks it
like
looks
examine her
fine.
body language. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
and she thinks it looks fine, and then
Like
so
he's like overcritical, and he thinks he
right, and so
might
some
as
of
well
it
just be fired or whatever. And so
right, and I mean, so some of it is, yeah, maybe he's just kind of a little bit of an overcritical person. He wants to, like he's maybe a bit nervous or something like that. Maybe that's some of it. But it also does seem like, yeah, that maybe he really wanted this job or wanted this position, whatever. And then he, rewatched and he's like, oh man, oh man, oh man. And then, so then, the first thing he sees is, his wife laughing a little bit with a guy. And so then decides to zoom in and is maybe extra insecure because of that event. Perhaps if he had just had, if they had just straight away told him, in that meeting, oh, you got it, and he was happy, perhaps none of this ever would have happened. Perhaps he wouldn't have ever destroyed his life. So there's this interesting way in which it all sort of melds together. This how one little action and one little event can make you kind of look
yeah.
on something differently for the rest of the day.
Well,
I mean, and we experience that in our own lives.
Yeah. Well, also it's good to know too that he's clearly pretty much not going to get the job at this point by the end of the episode as well. Because what do they say at the end of the meeting? They're pretty much going to like review his footage over like the next week or so and make sure there aren't any like massive deletions in his like like feed or whatever the heck. But like clearly like if he doesn't delete a good portion of just what's happened within like the past 24 hours or so,
Yeah,
like,
I didn't think about that. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Because like what did he do? Like he pretty much like almost like got super close to like spousal abusing his wife and like screaming in her face and stuff and all that. Literally broke into almost like the guy's house and like threatened him with like a broken beer bottle or vodka bottle or whatever the heck. And then he got drove drunk and then crashed his car into like a tree or something like that.
Yeah, and
so,
and I didn't bring this up earlier. Is in some ways he was being completely like irrational in the sense that who did Jonas hook up with there after the dinner party, right? He hooked up with another girl. He didn't hook up with he didn't even, right? So that he came back and you would think, oh, because he's basically at this point he's obsessed with the idea that Jonas is just like masturbating to his wife or something like that.
Yeah, like he even calls him out like directly like that. He's like, "Oh, like after you had your way with her, did you come back out here and then like look through your redo of my wife or whatever?"
Right, and so that's the thing he's upset about. But I mean, he was with someone else at that point. So it's it was definitely something that was unnecessary in a way. The complete his own complete self destruction. So.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to add, or is that a wrap?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think so. It's very interesting too, like because this is like just like almost like the tip of the iceberg for Black Mirror. Like like this is just like the third episode, and this pretty much wraps up the entire first season. And then going forward, we almost seem to get further. We get a further glimpse into Black Mirror and like what it represents and like the different stories that helps us sort of kind of really sort of lay out like the multiverse of which it's trying to build. But I think season one actually does a really great job of like setting up the future seasons. So, like,
that's a good point. Yeah, so
it builds like the triangle of like the different like possibilities. Like you have like the realistic, the in between, and then like the super fantastical, and then you have like everywhere in between there for sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And this is the first. This is the end of the first season, and it's definitely a good way to kick off the first season, especially with an ending like that. So. Anyway, but this is the end for this episode of Fourth Awakening. If you like the video, appreciate it if you hit the like button. But for now, we will see you guys next time around. Thanks.
All right. Have a good one.